Drew Allar returning for the 2025 season is absolutely great news for Penn State, but there's still work to be done.
You are Locked On Nittany Lions, your daily podcast on the Penn State Nittany Lions. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And as always, thanks so much for making Locked On Nittany Lions your first listen and watch every single day. My name is Zach Sako. I'm your host of the show. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You can keep the action going with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place just a $5 bet, and you will get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. As always, please be a part of the conversation down in the comments section. We're getting through a lot of bullet points here. Drew Allar, Beau, Pribula, quarterback depth chart, and plans for the transfer portal now that two huge dominoes fall. Penn State keeping Andy Kotelnicki, Penn State keeping Drew Allar for another season. So yes, this is great. There's some bad that is associated with it short term when we talk about Beau Pribula here, but a lot of great comes from this now because you get Drew Allar back, veteran experience, consistency. That is always going to be championed here in college football. And you get that with Drew Allar. Fourth-year college football player, a guy that could have gone off to the NFL and honestly I really think would have been selected in the first round. So you're getting a fringe, by all consensus accounts, it seems like a fringe first-round draft pick, back at quarterback, fourth-year player, third year starting, all along with the coordinator that tapped into his potential. Andy Kotelnicki and Drew Allar, a second consecutive season working together. What else could Penn State and James Franklin ask for going into the 2025 season? That is the foundation, that is the building block to start off, to spring forward in the 2025 season. Now, why did it happen? Well, when we talk about, in mentioning that, Drew Allar being a fringe first round pick, maybe a second round pick, hey, you might disagree with me. Do you disagree with the draft analysts too? Because they say that Drew Allar was either the third or fourth best quarterback going into the 2025 draft. Well, that wasn't good enough for Allar here, and let me explain why. So Allar coming back has to do with the fact that Kotelnicki returns. If Kotelnicki ended up taking the West Virginia job, or honestly any other job in general, if they didn't get to work together again, then Drew would have gone off to the NFL. It made sense. Why go through a third offensive coordinator change in your college career? That's going to hurt you more than it is going to help you, obviously. So Allar gets to work with Kotelnicki again, the guy that has helped him take that next step, and he assumes that he's going to take an even bigger step in 2025, right? But being a first-round pick or potentially being a fringe first-round pick, I mean, that still comes with prestige, obviously the finances, the money with it, but Drew can still do better than that. Drew is risking, or I shouldn't even say risking, he's banking on the fact, he is assuming that everything goes well enough at Penn State in his 2025 season, that he would be the first overall pick in 2026. So that is a big difference going from a fringe first round pick to maybe that Will Levis spot and I know Will Levis isn't doing well, but where he was drafted is where he was drafted in the 30s. That's a big difference than being drafted first overall. That contract, that's $40 million. Over 4 years rather than a few million over 4 years. Big difference. And at the same time, Drew gets to recover those losses through NIL. So if the NIL era did not exist, Drew Allar would be going off to the NFL and would say, okay, first, a fringe first round pick, maybe early day two selection is good enough for me. It's not in this case anymore. You can still make some money in NIL in college football right now, and he's probably going to get some big brand deals because Drew Allar, it's not about just chasing the number one overall pick in 2026. He is now in the Heisman conversation. He's going to be one of the preseason frontrunners, and if Penn State can get the playmakers around him through the transfer portal and continue to develop the players that they have, Tyseer Denmark, Trey Wallace will return, Amari Evans, right? That Drew Allar is going after a first overall pick. The goals don't just stop there. Heisman, national championship contender again. And I've already talked about that. They're contending for it now in 2024. Getting Kotelnicki back, getting Allar back puts them in contention to be a championship contender once again in 2025. Where do things stand right now? Because you just lost your backup quarterback that can go in and win you games if you're Penn State. Beau Pribula leaving is a big deal for the short term. The reason he's in the portal is because Drew Allar is coming back. Beau, with 2 years left of eligibility as a redshirt sophomore, will be a redshirt junior. I don't disagree with his decision, and I've made that clear. Penn State has a standard. This is a James Franklin and a Penn State football rule that they, and being the head coach, I like the standard actually. It's a shame because Beau Pribula shouldn't have to make this decision because of the college football calendar. There's really no one to blame. But if you're in the portal, you're clearly looking to move on. You are no longer part of the Penn State team. And as much as a team player Beau Pribula is, committed in 2020, was a part of the class of 2022, and then stayed as long as he did with the transfer portal, NIL, and he could have had an opportunity to start. Yet he stuck it out through all of it. So that is worth mentioning. Pribula didn't want to make this decision, but he had to. With 2 years of eligibility left and with a starting spot on the line, and it's not that there isn't a second portal window, but you need to go make your case to be a starting quarterback somewhere else now. And that's what Pribula did. This is a business decision. As much as everybody wanted a happy ending to the story, Pennsylvania kid, born and raised, Penn State fan, takes over after Allar goes into the NFL. Well, Allar also has his own goals. He wants to be a first overall pick. He thinks he can contend for the Heisman, be a part of a national championship caliber team in 2025. Those are all realistic goals. Beau Pribula starting at Penn State with Allar in the way, not a realistic goal. So the bad that comes with this, well, Pribula is not on the team. He is leaving the team. And James Franklin actually, in a way, admitted that he told Pribula that this was the best move going forward for him. Because the way that they prepare, Pribula would not be able to go into the portal, have these conversations, talk to other coaches, work with getting situated and landing at his next school, at the same time being able to fully prepare for SMU in this college football playoff game. That is the fact of the matter of it. Pribula would not have been able to do both to the fullest at the same time. There's a playoff game on the line. Pribula being in two places at once or trying to be, communications, distractions, it would have led to distractions, and then Pribula would not have been able to fulfill his obligations to Penn State if he stays as that quarterback number 2. You're kind of hoping for the best that Allar does not get hurt. You saw how valuable Beau Pribula was in that game against Wisconsin, and that he was just always a change of pace. Now you take that page out of the playbook. Now SMU, potentially Boise State, any of those other elite teams down the road that Penn State would hypothetically play in a postseason game, they don't have to prepare for the line package. And I get it. Its success rate wasn't as good as we thought it would be or that we would like it to be, but it's still a wrinkle that defensive coordinators would have to account for, and now they don't have to. You lose that insurance policy. If Allar needs a playoff, if he can't go all 4 quarters, Beau Pribula's not there. Now quarterback number 2 is Ethan Grunkemeyer. And yes, it is Grunkemeyer, not Grunkmeyer. Just want to say that, just want to put that out there. Ethan Grunkemeyer, true freshman, no in-game experience, seems to be a scout quarterback of the century based on the way that James Franklin just talks about him, which is good. It is good that there is this kind of positive intel, this positive discourse that Penn State is really high on the development and the eventual future that Grunkemeyer offers. But in the middle of a playoff game with no real in-game experience, not even garbage time, I don't have the most confidence for Grunkemeyer to succeed at this point in time. He would be the next guy up if Drew is unavailable. There's always Jackson Smolik, but Jackson Smolik, Penn State just admitted that he got cleared to resume full practice workout availability after that injury and that surgery to his leg. So Smolik's there. This is the current state of the depth chart. Long-term, Beckham Kritza is going to be playing at Penn State, or is going to be a part of the team, I should say. And then Troy Hune, top 10 elite quarterback in the making for the 2026 class. So that's just the overall outlook here. Beau Pribula having to leave before the playoffs. I don't fault him. I am not going to criticize him. And James Franklin even alluded to the fact that it was Beau's best decision for himself personally to go into the portal and leave the team in the process. That speaks volumes about Franklin as a program leader at Penn State. Doing what is best for Penn State, but also doing what is best for the individual player. You got to give respect to Franklin there, if that's the case, based on what he said in his press conference. So that's the state of the quarterback situation. 2025, the outlook is starting to look positive, but Penn State still needs to do a lot of work to build around Drew Allar. If Drew Allar comes back and they don't do anything to build around him, does this even matter? We'll talk about Penn State's portal plans on offense and defense coming up here on Locked On Nittany Lions. And today's show is brought to you by the College Football Playoff. It's that time of year. The College Football Playoff is back. And with the newly expanded 12-team format, it's guaranteed to be bigger and better than ever, bringing you all the hard-hitting and high-flying excitement that you love. TNT sports coverage of the College Football Playoff begins December 21st, starting with the College Football Playoff kickoff show presented by AT&T at 11 a.m. Eastern, leading into our first matchup. The Southern Methodist University Mustangs battling the Penn State Nittany Lions at noon. Then the Clemson Tigers look to upset the Texas Longhorns in a showdown at 4 p.m. Eastern. Don't miss a moment of the action. Watch the College Football Playoff presented by Allstate live on TNT, True TV, TBS, and Max. Again, the great news is that Drew Allar is coming back. That is a third-year starting quarterback, a fourth-year player in college football, and a really good one at that. Someone who can contend for the Heisman, someone who was starting to get first-round grades in the upcoming draft, and now Penn State has quarterback locked down. You also retain your offensive coordinator, your defensive coordinator. Don't forget about Justin Lustig over at special teams there. So Penn State has all of its coordinators back as well as the quarterback. All of that matters. So that's the great news, and that's the foundation, the building blocks for a successful 2025 season. And I won't call this the bad news. Okay, so Zach, give me the good news. All right, well, that's the good news. This isn't bad news, but it's pending news because you're losing Tyler Warren. What is Nicholas Singleton, Katron Allen doing? And then flip it over defensively. There are a lot of question marks that are going to flip this conversation in a week, 2 weeks. This stuff moves quickly. So let me go through the portal plans here, because who is replacing Tyler Warren's production? That is elite production, Heisman-like production that I don't see right now. With Trey Wallace, Amari Evans, you assume Caden Saunders is returning. I like Khalil Dinkins. I think Luke Reynolds has all the potential in the world. Eventually, Andrew Rapplier comes back. Tyser Denmark offers a lot of upside as well. But I don't even know, in the combination of all that, Tyler Warren was just so darn good. So all those guys have upside, and they'll contribute, and they'll be strong contributors in a Penn State offense. And remember, they're returning to the Andy Kotelnicki system, so they know it well. But when I look at Penn State's start to the transfer portal, it has not gone off. It has not gotten off to a good start. They are missing on those elite wide receivers. Is that because they're not recruiting well? Is that because there was the uncertainty if Drew was going to come back and some of those players made their decisions? Let me point to one example, and I can go through multiple ones. KC Concepcion, NC State, phenomenal receiver. He's in that elite category. He is the second overall player in the transfer portal according to On3. He doesn't even have Penn State in his top 6. That's kind of telling, given that Penn State needs a playmaker. Well, you could argue that, Penn State is tight end university. I like making that argument, but they're losing Tyler Warren, so there is that open availability for somebody else to assume that role as an elite playmaker. It doesn't matter if you're a tight end, a wide receiver, or a running back. There is no guarantee as far as who is going to be that ultra do-everything playmaker for Penn State, and Concepcion could have been that. I also want to point to the fact that they're just not even in the conversation for any of these other elite playmakers. Eric Singleton Jr. from Georgia Tech, Micah Hudson from Texas Tech, transferred to Texas A&M. Dane Key from Kentucky, Nick Anderson from Oklahoma, another Kentucky wide receiver, Berrien Brown. What gives? Why is Penn State not even at least mentioned or in the top five for the elite playmakers? Well, it's good that they're in conversations and they're going to have a visit with Eric Rivers or a Justin Bowick from Ball State. These are good complementary wide receivers, but how much do they move the needle? I think they move the needle in the fact of you get another veteran playmaker, but I'm talking about game changers, difference makers. Are any of these players that I've mentioned, both currently at Penn State and ones that could arrive at Penn State in the future, are they just that? Maybe Drew Allar, Andy Kotelnicki, and the combination of multiple guys here can be that and still give you a really good offense, one that has been top 10 in yards per play. Another name that I also want to throw out, Kyron Hudson, former USC wide receiver. I think this guy is ultra talented. Maybe with the workload, he can be a number one wide receiver, but there is a reason that he was the fourth, fifth option at USC. There was a reason for that at the least. He's going to take a visit at Penn State. These are all solid players. They all have upside. You could also point to some things like an Eric Rivers. He's played at FIU. Is Big Ten football going to be too big for him, right? Also, I just want to throw this out there because of the Dante Cephas effect here. We need to make sure that all of these playmakers can learn Andy Kotelnicki's playbook. And I know that Dante Cephas was coached by Mike Yurcich, right? Or Mike Yurcich was the offensive coordinator there. But it's an ongoing concern of mine, just generally speaking, because Cephas struggled to learn Yurcich's playbook. Andy Kotelnicki, in terms of complexity, is a huge step up from that. So you got to make sure that all these guys, and so that's why you want these players to enter the portal now and get them to Penn State now so they can go through winter workouts and a spring football season. I'm not saying that Penn State can't improve its offense and its defense through the spring portal window, but you're fighting an uphill battle to get everyone adjusted to the system and also chemistry. People don't realize how important chemistry is. So I've made it very apparent. It's important to make a splash at wide receiver. It's also just as important, if not more important, to retain your studs. So you have Drew Allar coming back. What about Nicholas Singleton? What about Katron Allen? They can go off to the NFL. You're really banking on the fact of, okay, I know what's behind them. Cam Wallace is recovering from an injury. Quentin Martin, Corey Smith, are they ready to step up as redshirt freshmen? Same thing applies to a Luke Reynolds, a true sophomore, but a second-year player is my point. Tyseer Denmark. Are those guys ready to be that true difference maker? Maybe they are. But I don't think Penn State would be as aggressive in the transfer portal if they felt that type of way about its current players. They're not just looking for depth, they're looking for difference makers. I will say this, Penn State's offensive line is in a good spot. Penn State's offensive line has everybody coming back. Most likely, Nick Dawkins has a decision to make. He can actually come back. The only one that's guaranteed to go off to the NFL is Sal Wormley. Everybody else can come back. So the starting lineup and the depth chart at offensive line is secure. And this conversation also applies defensively. What are you doing in terms of competitive NIL for Denai Dennis Sutton, Zane Durant, Kobe King, Zach Wheatley, guys that can all go off to the NFL? We saw the decision KJ Winston made. Who's to say they can't make the same decision? So Penn State, as much as they want to go out and be aggressive in the transfer portal, they have to be aggressive and competitive with their NIL in-house. Or else national championship contender is just an afterthought if you can't retain. And I would say, and I've made this argument, it is more important to keep the players that you have in-house and invest in them rather than going and trying to get as many people in transfer portal, college football free agency, because it goes back to my other point, chemistry. So those are the players that Penn State is targeting offensively. They're also looking at some other offensive line depth. At Utah State's Teague Anderson, a solid player, but it's not necessarily a need like wide receiver. Talking about defense, same thing. We'll go through the plans defensively. They're talking to Bear Alexander, David Blay, Anai White, a lot of defensive linemen because Penn State has defensive line depth issues if they don't figure this out sooner rather than later. I'll tell you more about it on the other side of this break. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You can keep tackling the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers can bet just $5 and you will get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get that hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more. And it's all on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. And let's look over at FanDuel.com, and you will see the lines for Penn State versus SMU. Penn State is an 8.5-point favorite, minus 320 on the money line. If you're thinking SMU, plus 255. Not a lot of line movement here. The total is still at 53.5. I find that interesting. The lines have not moved from 8.5 and 53.5. So if you like those lines, you can bet them over at FanDuel.com. And remember, you will get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That is FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. And today's episode is also brought to you by PrizePicks. PrizePicks is the best place to get real money sports action. With over 10 million members and billions of dollars in awarded winnings, PrizePicks has made daily fantasy sports accessible to all. You just pick more or less on at least 2 players for a shot to win up to 1,000 times your cash. Your game all season long. Run your game all season long on PrizePicks, America's #1 daily fantasy sports app. You can make your holidays bigger and brighter with PrizePicks, the best place to get real money action while watching your favorite sports. And yes, you can now win up to 1,000 times your money on PrizePicks. PrizePicks now offers MasterCard for quick and easy deposits into your account this sports season. And you can join now because this holiday season, PrizePicks is giving away 2 free picks in December, and they're giving away $30+ million in rewards during Picksmas. Do you think Saquon Barkley is going to have more or less than 90 rushing yards? Do you think that Jalen Hurts is going to have more or less than 1.5 passing touchdowns? You can cook up your hot takes with your friends and win real money this football season when you and your crew run your game on PrizePicks. Download the app today. Use promo code LOCKEDONCollege to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Again, download the app today. Use promo code LOCKEDONCollege to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Again, that is PrizePicks. Run your game. Now let's talk about the defensive side of things, because Penn State is going after defensive linemen. They need depth regardless, even if Dennis Sutton and Zane Durant come back, because you can expect them to lose Abdul Carter. Abdul Carter is going in the top 10 of the draft conservatively, top 15. There's really no realistic NIL deal that can bring him back. But then in terms of eligibility, you are losing Devontae Thomas, Amin Vanover, Smith Vilbert, Keziah Izzard, yes. And then Alonzo Ford, now that I have confirmation that he is returning, I was wondering because he's a redshirt senior with an asterisk, but he has eligibility left with the COVID season. I imagine he's coming back, but he's also recovering from an injury, an undisclosed injury, but clearly a serious one that has kept him out for the remainder of the season. So Penn State absolutely needs defensive line depth across the board, even if Dennis Sutton and Zane Durant return. If they don't, then things get really dire. And Penn State's going to have to focus. Wide receiver isn't even the biggest need at that point. It's going to be defensive line across the board. With or without Dennis Sutton or Zane Durant, they have to get defensive linemen, period. So there's a lot of interest from Bear Alexander between him and Penn State, so vice versa. My thoughts on Bear Alexander: we know how talented he is. He was a backup at Georgia. He contributed in that national championship game against Georgia. Of course, he is associated with the fact that left in the middle of the season at USC. And I'm not here to discuss, okay, was it NIL related? Was it playing time related? It could have been any of those things. But Bear Alexander has a negative connotation with him. And when Penn State talks about team first and chemistry and everything else, Bear Alexander is not that. He's just not. So it was also pointed out that Bear Alexander, in his Penn State recruitment, because he already had the visit, he had the Penn State uniform on to take pictures. He has a Georgia tattoo, and his profile picture is of him in his USC uniform. That's the modern age of college football, as it was appropriately summed up. I don't like the idea of Bear Alexander with or without Zane Durant. This isn't, well, if Zane Durant leaves, I don't even know that I like Bear Alexander joining Penn State. It's down to Oregon, SMU, and Penn State. Oregon is spending beaucoup dollars on other recruits out of the transfer portal. So I think realistically, it's down to SMU and Penn State. I just want to avoid it. I think the situation, maybe he could be a solid contributor in terms of talent, but with him going to Georgia and then to USC and all of the accusations that are around him in terms of demanding more playing time and wanting more NIL, I don't know that this sets up nicely. So let's pivot and look at another player in David Blay. David Blay, I like this player a lot out of the portal, and so does Penn State. This is the number 2 defensive lineman per 24/7, 6'4", 300 pounds, a nice, effective combination of size and speed, and he's from Pennsylvania. This one makes a lot of sense. This is a guy that can come in and start, be a co-starter right alongside. Again, with or without Zane Durant in the fold, you need to get this guy one way or another. This is the splash that Penn State could need and start to turn things around in the transfer portal, because they are missing on elite wide receivers. Everything is pending across the board in general, but it's going to be difficult. Everybody and their brother wants David Blay to play for their favorite college football program. So I wouldn't say the odds are likely. Penn State has a decent chance, but I can't say, oh, they're favorable or it's definitely going to happen. I would say it's 50-50 just because it is crowded with everybody that wants David Blay. Former Louisiana Tech player also. Defensive tackle, would come in and start right away for Tom Allen's defense. Then there's Anai White. Anai White, Texas A&M transfer, former top 50 prospect overall out of high school from the state of Pennsylvania. And this is a player that you would like to couple with Dani Dennis Sutton, but then becomes an absolute need if you can't get him, or if you lose Dani Dennis Sutton, pardon me. If you lose DDS to the draft, you absolutely need to go and get a player like Anai White. Fortunately for Penn State, you have a player like Max Granville, who's coming on strong. Don't forget about Jalen Harvey. So I would say defensive tackle is more of the bigger need for Penn State at this point. You do have some up-and-coming players at defensive end, but I liken that to the fact of, okay, it's the same thing with Tyser Denmark. Are they going to come in and make an immediate impact, or is there still a learning curve? Because look at Tony Rojas. Tony Rojas did not have the season we all expected him to. There were learning curves, there were speed bumps along the way, and he did not have the best season. Talk about a sophomore slump there, and you just have to wonder, it's a lot. It's a lot. So you can't just guarantee that Denmark or any of Max Granville or anybody else is going to have this instant impact. They still need to develop to an extent. And Anai White gives you starting capability, helps you, allows you to continue to develop Granville and Harvey and other defensive ends that still need time to mature in this case. And then Penn State doesn't have to throw them into the fire and put so much pressure on them. And it just helps build out the depth chart. You want Granville as a second defensive end, not necessarily a starter at this point in time. Remember, he was supposed to be a high school senior this past season. He's going to be, in essence, a true freshman. Penn State is also targeting linebackers in this case. Kendall Daniels, he projects as a safety, as a linebacker. He would be that player that fills that KJ Winston void, or maybe that Jalen Reed void, where you just have a playmaker that you can do a lot of things with defensively. He's 6'4", he's north of 230 pounds, but he's a guy that can be physical in run defense and also can drop back into coverage in that hybrid role that Tom Allen needs to really make that 4-2-5 work. If Penn State's going to get anybody, honestly, Daniels would be the top priority in this case. Yes, even beyond defensive line depth, both at the tackle and defensive end spot. Secondary is actually in pretty good shape. I know they're losing KJ Winston. I know they're losing Jalen Reed, but you get Jalen Kimber back. You get AJ Harris back. Positive intel about Dejon Lane, but you would still like him to continue to develop. I don't know if he's an immediate starter going into next season, but he will certainly contend. This is where you miss out on having a King Mack, but It's the way things go now in college football. My point being is that secondary is not my biggest concern. Penn State has done so well with its recruitment. You think of guys like Zion Tracy, of Abu Toure. There are a lot of players that can factor in and play some really meaningful snaps next season. You can always add more depth. You can always add more quality players, but Penn State's priorities should be on the front seven and not in the back half of the defense. That's going to do it for this edition of Locked On Nittany Lions. That sums up the quarterback situation and Penn State's current plans for the transfer portal. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments section. Please leave a like on this episode, share it with friends and family. Thank you so much for being a part of these conversations around Penn State football, Penn State wrestling, and Penn State basketball. If you're not already, become an everyday or subscribe to Locked On Nittany Lions on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts for the latest conversations around your favorite Penn State sports teams. And once again, thanks so much for making Locked On Nittany Lions your first listen and watch every single day. For your second listen and watch, check out Locked On Big Ten with host Craig Sheeman. Craig puts the Big Ten first when everyone else overlooks it. And with all this playoff discourse, yeah, that's certainly the case. You can find Locked On Big Ten available on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.